Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, I'm here today to talk about some common vacuum sealing issues that you might have, so I can have all this in one place next time people have these questions or are having issues with their jars not sealing. Now, just to give you a rough overview, I do vacuum seal all of my dried products. Now, not everything needs to be vacuum sealed, just a airtight lid can be good enough, especially with herbs. They can do just fine without vacuum sealing, but I still vacuum seal everything. But when it comes to meats and eggs and cheese and you're putting them into long-term storage, yes, I recommend vacuum sealing, and anything with fats in it like nuts. I vacuum seal all the nuts that I store. And I do that because whenever you're talking about anything with fat in it, vacuum sealing will prevent rancidity because it's the oxygen exposure which will cause the things to go rancid. Now, there's many ways to vacuum seal, and I'm not going to cover all those here. I have a separate video just on that where I show all the different options of vacuum sealing, including using the vacuum chamber for jars that don't have canning lids like you can with using the Food Saver top, or even the off-brand ones that are a lot cheaper, and then some kind of pump with it. So I cover all that. Please go check that video out if you're new to this and you want to figure out what your options are and what's going to be best for you. But again, yes, the chamber, Patrick makes and sell these. We do not have an Etsy store, by the way, and if you're seeing something just like this on Etsy, that's not ours. That's somebody who copied our design. And no, it's not copyrighted. They just copied our design, and some people are buying it thinking it's us when it's not. Just letting you know. But if you're interested in purchasing what we have, please send me an email at raincountryhomestead@gmail.com, and I will send you out a product list, which also includes a pretty detailed description about the chambers and the two different sizes that we sell. So anyway, moving on. Let's talk about powders. So right here I have, they might look the same, but they're two different things. This is a homemade cheese powder that I made from cheese that I aged and then dried it out and then powdered it up. Well, it's not really powder. It's almost more like granules, but I do use this quite a bit, mostly when I'm cooking eggs or making some kind of cheese sauce. And then right here are some dehydrated and powdered eggs from our own chickens. And I made sure in this case to try to keep them as raw as possible so they'll work well in baking. This is my favorite way now to preserve the excess eggs from our chickens, and I have about 1.5 gallons of powdered eggs put up, and I think there's just about 3 dozen eggs in each jar. So I like it because it takes up less space and so on. And if you're interested in how to do this, I have videos on both. I'll link to in the description box down below. So anyway, the main thing about this, I'll show you this jar because you can see it best, is that whenever you're trying to seal up anything that's in a powder form, it could be maca root powder, it could be the greens that you dehydrated and powdered up, or zucchini powder, or cheese or eggs, you need to put a barrier over the top. And what you're seeing here is a piece of cotton cloth. And so that, once you get the ingredients in your jar, you got to leave some headspace, and then you're going to put some kind of barrier over the top. I use cotton cloth because I have tons of it on hand and I can reuse it again and again. So when I open up this jar and start working through that, I can wash up that piece of cloth and use it on the next jar that I make from this year's eggs. And some other options would be using like the paper muffin liners. Those are usually a pretty good size to put over the top. You can use a piece of paper towel. You can use a paper coffee filter that you cut down. Whatever it is that you're not concerned about putting toxins into your food, anything that's going to prevent the powders from getting sucked up under the lid. And so they make a layer between the rim of the jar and the lid. Because, see, this isn't vacuum sealed, because I'm going to vacuum seal this soon here. If you have a layer of powder that gets up in here and it's under the lid, your jar's either not going to seal at all, or it'll make basically a false seal that will get lost in a short period of time. And so that's what the barrier is for, is to prevent those powders from coming up and under. Now, another thing is if you get your jars too full, like this might be a little too full. This is something that lost a seal, and so I got to reseal it. And getting your jars too full can, just like with regular canning, can prevent your lid from getting a good enough seal on it. And so that's one thing, if you think that's possibly the case, because when it starts sucking down that lid, if the product inside is touching the lid, then that could be what's causing it to come unsealed. I don't really think that's the problem here, even though that is pretty full. So I'm going to go ahead and try it again just like it is. But the other things you got to look out for too, some other common issues, is one thing I find is that using lids that I've already canned with, those tend to work best for vacuum sealing. They usually work better than brand new lids, believe it or not. So I save all of my lids that I've previously canned with, as long as they're not damaged along the edge right here, or none of this part here is damaged or missing. Anything that's going to prevent it from sealing well around the rim of the jar. Or if your jar, make sure you feel the top, the rim. If it's not perfectly smooth, or you feel any cracks or just any anomalies, that's what's going to prevent a good seal. Sometimes pressure canning, it can still get past that, but not always. So you should never use any jars that have cracks for any kind of vacuum sealing or canning anyway. But I have this jar, one of my quart jars, and I keep, I'll be trying to vacuum seal in it, and I'm like, why is the seal not happening there? I run my finger and I'm like, oh, it's this weird jar. So I have this weird jar. It's just some kind of anomaly that happened in the process of making the jar, and it's very rough all around this rim. It's just like little teeny tiny bumps. So it clearly something happened in the manufacturing. So it's absolutely not good for vacuum sealing or canning. And so that I try to set it aside and use it for other things instead of, things I don't need vacuum sealed, like my teas and stuff here that I'm getting into all the time anyway. So these are some of the things that can prevent a good seal. So make sure that your lid is in really good condition. Used lids are great, but you just want to make sure there's nothing embedded and just no damage on the lid or on the jar. So I'm going to go ahead and vacuum seal this real quick using my favorite method, which is a brake bleeder pump, which your brake bleeder kits are found in automotive. This is not, you're not going to find this in food preservation. Some people assume that a brake bleeder kit, they don't put it together, that it's automotive, because it's for bleeding brakes on rigs. But I usually have a link when I'm talking about this stuff. I usually try to put a link to one of these below, but you can find them typically in the automotive section. But I still say check out that link, and so you'll know exactly what it looks like. I use the tip like this. There's several different configurations you can use, but I use this tip, put it on there, put the hose on there, stick the tip down into the hole of the Food Saver top or whatever brand top you have that goes over your jar, and then I just pump until this gets up past where it says 15 or 400. It says 15 on top and 400 on the bottom. And once the needle gets past that, or the needle stops moving altogether, sometimes I'll just keep going. And with this one, I'm going to keep going until the needle stops entirely, just because it's already come unsealed once. And I don't know if you heard that little tink sound that it made. Usually it's a good sign that it's sealed, but I just want to make sure. It's obviously still pulling air out. There we go, finally stopped. And then always check right away. If you can pick it up by the lid and it doesn't come off, then it is sealed. And I do always put a band on just in case it does come unsealed. That's going to help keep air from getting in, not entirely, but it's going to help. But it's also going to prevent you from having any accidents, thinking that if you don't put the band on there and you think your jar's sealed and you go reach and grab it like this, like I tend to do, like I say, I do everything kind of comb brio, you're going to have stuff flying everywhere and you're going to make a big old mess. So yes, when you're talking about vacuum sealed goods, always put a band on there. I highly recommend doing that. Now, some other things that can happen that can cause your jars to come unsealed are extreme changes in temperature. Going from really cold to really hot. The change in temperature can cause, and this can happen with canned goods too, which is why you want to keep all of your items, be it water bath can, pressure can, or vacuum sealed, in a place where the temperature stays pretty moderate. I mean, it can have some fluctuations, but if they're extreme, like going from, like say you're keeping it on your garage and your garage gets really hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, that's not a good place to store your food. You want the climate to stay somewhat controlled. But yes, those changes in temperature can cause you to lose seal because you'll have different pressure changes inside the jar. And then the other thing is, if these are getting knocked around a lot, sometimes even just doing this can cause a jar to come unsealed. Now, that didn't come unsealed, so I feel pretty good about that. That means it's probably going to stay sealed. If knocking it around causes it to come unsealed, though, you're probably not pulling enough of a vacuum on your jars. So that is one of the other things. So you saw how I kept going, and hopefully I'll get a clear enough close-up of that gauge where I went quite a ways on that, and I just kept going until the needle stopped moving. That's going to apply to any kind of thing that you're using where at least you have a gauge to go by, and which also includes the vacuum chamber. But if you're using something like an electric thing, like they have the little electric handheld one I show in that video, and you'll hear the sound. When it starts, you can tell when it's getting all the oxygen out, because it can't keep pulling more oxygen, so it starts to make kind of a bogging down kind of sound. And you'll notice this on your other types of vacuum sealing devices like Food Saver and so on. But sometimes, and this is one of the many reasons I just gave up on Food Saver altogether, is that a lot of times it just did not have, especially once it hit about the 2-year mark, enough oomph to really pull a good vacuum on my jars, and I would constantly lose seals, especially when it came to the regular mouth. When it came to using the Food Saver top for the regular mouth and the Food Saver machine with the regular mouth jar, sometimes I just couldn't even get it to seal at all. So part of that has to do with the strength of the Food Saver machine and how much of a vacuum is pulling, but it also has to do with the poor design of the Food Saver brand regular mouth, which is designed just a little bit different than the wide mouth. I never have problems with this one, but there's off-brand ones that are actually made better, where the regular mouth top is designed just like this right here, and so it works just fine. So I never have problems with those ones either. Now, I also have had people who got a brake bleeder pump, and right from the get-go it wasn't even pulling a vacuum. The needle wasn't moving at all. So either that means there's some kind of crack in the jar, some defect in the lid, or they ended up with a faulty brake bleeder pump and they just need to send it back and get a new one. I have 3 total now, because one is a backup, and then I have the one I like to keep, as you'll see here, it's constantly hooked up to my chamber, so I don't have to keep pulling it off this barb because it's a pain to do that. And then I have my other one that always has this in it for using with these, and that just makes it easier for me. But they're pretty inexpensive, $20 to $25 you get the kit. And it's one of the cheapest ways you can go when it comes to vacuum sealing, but it does require some power of the hand. But as you would have seen, to help ease that up, you just make sure that you rest the handle against the surface, and then you're using your whole arm instead of doing this. I wouldn't be able to pump. Maybe would be able to do 1 jar, and that's it. And then my wrist it'd be toast by the time I got done. So that is definitely much harder. You want to press down, get some leverage and press down. But yes, you just want to make sure you're really pulling a good vacuum on that, because if it's not a strong enough vacuum, the lid will seem sealed for a while and then it can just come undone. And then let's come back to the new lids. If you're having to use new lids, yes, they can work just fine, but sometimes there's just something about them when they haven't been used especially for pressure canning or water bath canning, that just seems like they need a little extra boost sometimes. Now, ever since using my brake bleeder pump, I've never had an issue with this, but what I found was if I took the lids when I was using the Food Saver machine and was having issues, if I took the lids and slightly warmed them, so you lay the lid, see, this isn't sealed, so I'll use this one, this is my Yarrow. You lay the lid this way, okay, metal side down on a burner on low for just a few seconds. It's just going to give it enough to warm this. You don't want to put it in water like you would for canning, because then it's going to be wet And then by the time it finally dries off and you go to put it on there, it's going to be cold again. So you just want to warm it very slightly, just enough to warm up this gummy layer right here, so that it then will seal better. It just makes that a little softer. And thus, when you go to vacuum seal, that usually works pretty well. So you can give that a try if all you have is brand new lids that you're trying to vacuum seal with, or even old lids that just don't seem to be cutting it. Just give that a try. If you've checked it and you don't see anything else wrong with it, try it and just see if that works for you. But again, just slightly warm. Obviously, you got to be able to grab hold of it and take it off of there. You don't, if you leave it too long, it's going to totally melt that stuff, and then it's not going to be any good. All right, well, that's it for this video. I hope this information will be helpful, and any other thoughts or ideas any of you have, please put them in comments down below. And please go check out the other vacuum sealing related videos I'll be putting in the description box by clicking on either more or show more somewhere down here. Right below the video screen, you'll find that, and that will open the whole description box so you can find all the information that I put in there. And thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.